Welcome to the Customer Management IQ video interview series. I'm your host, Corey Bennett. Joining me right now is Clint Morley, the Vice President of Customer Service and Engagement of Discover Financial Services. Clint is one of our keynote speakers here at the 12th Annual Call Center Week in Las Vegas, which we are on site at currently. And he joins me right now to talk about his presentation, which was titled Achieving World-Class Performance, Why the Customer's Voice is the One True Judge of Service. Thanks for coming on, Clint. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Corey.
So to start off, I know in your presentation you talk about the many ways to collect customer feedback. What are your suggestions for how to compile all of this feedback and actually create some or notice trends across it?
Yeah, one of the things that I touched on with the presentation is that the voice of the customer isn't just expressed or articulated concerns. It's also how they act as well. And so the first thing I'd call out is that you can't just be listening to your customers. You also have to be paying attention to what they do. If a customer stops coming into you, that is a pretty clearly expressed concern.
Yeah.
And so you know, the first thing I would say is that you need to acknowledge that there's more than one element or way that you need to measure the voice of the customer. The next thing I'd speak to is in terms of actually collecting the voice of the customer, you need to have some way of actually gathering it. And it needn't be sophisticated or complicated. I know many organizations will get caught up in waiting for something that's perfect before they look to execute. But you have your account managers or your customer service representatives speaking to customers every single day, and those customers are expressing concern. And it can be as simple as anytime a customer says something that they're specifically dissatisfied about, having your account managers or customer service representatives write it down on a piece of paper and just passing those pieces of paper to their frontline management so that you can aggregate that information. So you need to have some means of gathering it, and then once you gather it and you put it all in one place, you then need to work through actual prioritization. And I think prioritization is fairly simple. You need to do kind of a qualitative assessment of how frequently does it happen. So if it happens a lot and happens to a lot of customers, it's of greater concern. And then a qualitative assessment of what is the impact. I mean, there's some things that may be happening with great frequency, but it's not a huge impact customer experience. It's a minor irritant, where you might have something that happens infrequently, but is a major irritant and clearly something that you need to address.
So what are some of your suggestions if a company has limited financial resources? You said it doesn't have to be complicated. What are some of your suggestions there if you're trying to collect this data and notice trends, but you don't want to dedicate a lot of your resources? You want to be cost efficient there. Yeah,
what I would suggest is that if you have a call site that has 50 people, 100 people, there's a real luxury with that. You really can get to the point where your account center representatives, your customer service representatives very well. And what I would suggest is, there's a couple different approaches. One example or one approach would be that, again, you just have them tracking throughout the day, and then on a weekly basis, you sit down with them and you have focus groups where you talk about the customer experience and identified concerns about the customer experience. But you can also, if you're concerned about the time that involves, and you want to actually begin to develop leaders within your organization, you can designate customer advocates within each team or within each group of people within your site, and have them responsible for gathering the concerns gathered or expressed from the customers to the members of their team, and have those customer advocates come to you and tell you about the concerns being expressed by your customers. The key, though, is to make it as quantitative as you can. It can't just be, my peers are telling me that customers are concerned about X. They need to come to you and say, 5 people said this happened 6 times, and so you actually know the number of what's happening. So it's not this perceptual somebody who just happens to be squeaking or complaining the loudest.
So once you have those insights, how do you actually, at Discover, how do you track improvement in customer satisfaction to those insights that you actually had and noticed from your frontline staff?
So, let's say, for example, a customer is expressing concern about a specific process, and we identify this process isn't working as well as we would like it to be. So, a customer states concern, or customers state concern, and that's how you prioritize. You look at the process and you identify there's 3 or 4 unnecessary steps. It's very easy to measure. You re-engineer the process, and instead of having 3 or 4 steps, you have 1 step or 2 steps. So, that's very straightforward. And you can also measure the amount of expressed customer dissatisfaction as well. But you can get more sophisticated than that. If we've determined that there's a specific irritation that's significant, and it's actually influencing both churn and poor experience spend, we'll actually measure what happens with our attrition rates, our customer attrition rates after we make these changes compared to what happened prior to, and also what's happening with our post-interaction spend. Are we seeing a dip typically if a customer has a bad experience with you, they're going to use you less. With us, they use the card less than they were prior to that interaction. So we'll see what happened with their spend rates to validate that the change we've made has been a positive one.
Interesting. I'd be interested to talk a bit also about your reward program for service agents. What do you do at Discover, and what are some of your best practices regarding implementing a good positive rewards program?
I think the best rewards programs are rewards programs that you build in conjunction with your account managers, with the end user in mind. It's very easy for you and I to sit in this room and say this is the right way for us to measure our account managers or our frontline customer service representatives, but we're probably not going to be very effective, and we're not going to design a program that our people believe in. So you need to have frontline management and the actual people participating in any kind of reward program participating in setting up what it's actually going to look like. And I also think another common failing is there's really two, I believe. One is you need to make sure that there's alignment throughout the entire organization. So whatever I'm measuring that frontline customer-facing representative on, it has to truly reflect what we value as an organization, and has to reflect it proportionately as well. So if 60% of their evaluation or incentive or the metrics that they measure to and are coached to on a daily basis is around expense and AHT, what you're saying is your organization values expense above all else. So you have to be very careful about that alignment.
So what do you value at Discover? What are those metrics that you're looking at that come from top down to agents?
It's really experience, and measuring experience is a challenge, specifically at the account manager level. You can cite customer SAT scores, but that's an imperfect measure. You can cite first call resolution. I think that's an imperfect measure. You can cite post-call spend, which is something that's unique to us in our industry. But that's a valuable metric for us, but there are imperfections with that as well. And then, of course, there's qualitative assessments of how the calls sound.
And I'm interested in, you said they're imperfect measures. Why do you see them as imperfect measers?
Well, there are other things that influence first call resolution. If you take 100 phone calls in a day, which is typically what our agents take, some of those calls are going to call back, and there's very little that the account manager can do to influence that. That's the nature of general inquiries. Some of the people, some of the other industries that might be listening to this podcast are going to have more straightforward inquiries where they're more common, more similar, and if that's the case, then I think FCR increases in validity.
And so, is it possible to have a bad rewards program, though? Because everyone, likes rewards, likes recognition. When would it be, or what are some of the pitfalls associated with a bad rewards program?
It is, well, to go back to the point that I was making earlier. There's, the mistakes that you can make are you're misaligned with what's truly important. So if you're paying incentives or you're coaching to metrics that aren't aligned with your organizational vision, that's a bad rewards program. And if you have too much, if you're attempting to measure too much, that's a bad rewards program. And those are both really common failings within the industry, and certainly things that we've struggled with in the past with Discover Card as well. So I mean, the key is that you have to have a metric that clearly aligns with your organizational priorities, and you have to make sure that you're not paying incentive or measuring 15 things. If you come to me and you say, there's 10 things on your plate and they're all A's, well, none of them are A's. They're all C's. Unless you come to me and say, here are your 2 A's, and here are your B's, and here are your C's, and you give me that very clear delineation as an employee, how do you want me to respond to that? You've given me more than I can actually even digest.
So are there some things that you at Discover were measuring and found, this isn't working for us, we're not going to measure this metric anymore?
We have a constant debate about our metrics, and I think that it's less about we're not going to measure them, but it's how we're going to reinforce them. Some metrics we should coach to, and they shouldn't even make it on to the performance evaluation. Actually, I was just having an interesting conversation with somebody else that was attending the conference, and they were talking about transfer rates and the measuring of transfer rates. And I think that their approach was very, very solid. The conversation that we had was, I don't know that you can drive transfer rates down to the account manager level or the frontline customer service facing representative level, because it encourages poor behavior. You don't want your frontline representatives to not transfer a call if they can get it someplace that customer is going to get a better experience because of speaking to this other person. If they're not going to transfer because they're concerned about the metric, you're driving negative behavior. And so I think transfer rates are a good example of an incredibly important metric, a metric that you should measure, but you need to reinforce it and manage to it in the appropriate way.
Interesting. Well, thanks so much, Clint. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And to our viewers out there, you can check out more of our videos at customermanagementiq.com. Once again, I'm your host. And until next time, thanks for watching.